go around.
Oh.
The Bryant Museum is like a church.
Okay.
You walk in, I've never seen a museum.
I've been to the whole thing.
Yeah, but this you walk in, it's got everything in there, just like you do. What do you mean? You go in, you fly.
Let's begin. All right, today is July 27. My name is Adolfho Romero, and I'm here on behalf of the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program. And I'm here as part of the Mississippi Freedom Project 2022 15-year trip. And today I'm here with my colleague,
Angelica McGee.
and we are here to interview can you please state your name and can you spell it out for us?
Andre DeBerry, Andre, capital Berry.
All right, Andre. Well, thank you for joining us today. It is a great honor. Thank you for making time out of your day to be with us here today.
Thank you.
All right, so I guess as we begin now, can you tell us a little bit about your history? Where were you born, raised? Where were your parents born and raised? And just a little bit about your background.
Okay. I was born on August 12th, 1958, here in the city of Holly Springs, Mississippi. My parents were Willie Mae McEwen DeBerry, and Roy Lee DeBerry Sr. My mom was actually born in Oxford, Mississippi. My dad was born in Holly Springs, Mississippi. Grew up here in Holly Springs, left Holly Springs after graduation and went to Jackson, Mississippi, and attended Jackson State University, majored in political science. After which I came back to the city and ran for alderman at large in 1989. And after that, some 12 years later, actually ran for mayor in 2001 and served 3 terms as mayor of the city.
Okay, perfect. Can you tell me a little bit about how was it that you got involved with the alderman, and then how did you transition to mayor? What was the motivation behind that?
Well, after having really been born during the struggle, during the civil rights movement, my brother Roy Jr., who was very active with the Freedom Riders and SNCC, as a matter of fact, he was there was a SNCC house here, and I used to spend a lot of time. He's actually 11 years older than me, so when he was in high school, he would go down to the SNCC house and he'd take me down with him. So I was always interested in community involvement in what was happening. And after majoring in political science at Jackson State, I always had an interest in government. Wanted to be an attorney, but actually wound up going towards the electoral politics side of it, and just decided to come back to my home community and try to improve situations here as opposed to going. Many people thought that I should have gone to places like Atlanta or maybe Jackson, where to hit the capitals, or even D.C. But my thing was to go off and get the information and get tools to come back to change my own community.
Could you speak more to your brother's experience in the Freedom Riders and the SNCC as you experienced it kind of on the outside?
My brother?
Yes.
I remember when he was doing the riot and when they were actually imprisoned on the fairgrounds at Jackson. And obviously, family was very concerned because he was rather young. Roy was probably in early teens, maybe 13 or 14 at that time.
Wow.
And so we were all really concerned because the situations were kind of hyped at that time. We had just had the situation with in Philadelphia with the 3 Freedom Riders. Everybody was on hype. So it was, as a family, it was really a tense time. And even when we participated in with Cotton Reader, who came through. Stokely Carmichael came through because he was SNCC, but there was another protest, another march leader named Cotton Reader. Came to think of his first name. So we actually led walkouts of the primary school. So actually, when I was in primary school, probably about 2nd, 3rd grade, we were actually marching in protest, So it's always been in my blood, and so.
That actually leads to a follow-up question that I had was, do you think that there was someone in your family, like a matriarch or patriarch or anybody who kind of instilled that in your family since at a very young age you guys were really involved with serious.
In the beginning, I thought it was my dad, but I've since learned that even on my mom's side, I had a great uncle who was participating in a protest at Mississippi Valley State when they were going to have a president. It was Governor Ross Barnett, I think, was coming to speak, and they walked out in protest, and so he actually got expelled from school, and so I didn't know that, but it's always been permeated throughout my families. From always, it was just a sense of wanting and learning and wanting to know your history and to change the history. I mean, because living in Mississippi at that time was not nice. It was a difficult time, and so I just thought to myself, even in first grade, I started a club. My sister-in-law, who was my first grade teacher, told me I started a club called the Can Do Club, and because I just believed we could do better than what we were doing. And so I've always had that urge to change, to be the change that I wanted to see.
What gave you the courage to stay here, especially during a difficult time, instead of going to a place like Atlanta?
It was home, and I've always been a firm believer that charity begins at home, as the scripture said, and then spreads abroad. You don't go change another community; you change yours, because communities don't get better because people run; they get better because people stay in and make them change. And this was my dirt, and dirt is important to me. Family is important. This is what my parents were. I've even dealing with my genealogy now. That's important to know where my people came from, and this is my family home, and I was not going to let anybody drive me away from it.
Was there any relation with your family to the church in these areas?
Yeah. My family was real big in the Baptist church here. Matter of fact, several churches here. I have a grandfather, a great uncle, that actually helped start one of the churches here called Strawberry Missionary Baptist Church, which is probably one of the oldest Baptist churches in Mississippi Baptist Church, missionary Baptist churches, and so we've always had a strong connection to the church. My parents obviously both were brought up in the church and brought us up in the church and believed in. Matter of fact, when I come home from college on Sunday, on the weekends, my father would first thing would ask me, did I bring my church clothes, as he would say, because we were going to church Sunday.
Mm-hmm. So throughout our interviews, we've heard about some of the stigma for Baptist churches, especially in this area, and I think in the South in general. If you could speak to that at all and kind of
what specifically stigma?
Just that some of their practices have kept out like newer generations, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I think there's a pro and a con there. I think by nature, the Baptist church, because it has no hierarchy. You have churches like the Catholic Church or the CME Church or the United Methodist churches that have hierarchies with bishops, and so there's a cleansing and a filtering. But with the Baptist Church, the vote of the Baptist Church is autonomy. The power rests within the power of the church congregation, and so many times they were very conservative about women coming in. It has been, I think, the most difficult sect to really bring in female ministers because you had a lot of chauvinistic men who just didn't believe that women should be pastoring churches. And a lot of the men were there had chauvinistic ideas as well, because that was their one place that they could exude power. And because they didn't have power anywhere else other than their home or in the church, because outside of that, they really were not considered as men, at that time. And so, but my at the same time, my experience was that we were actually trained in the Baptist church to be open, but now if you question, you got, I got slapped down a few times, not figuratively, not literally, but figuratively for questioning things. But I was always one to ask the question why. I'm like, like Robert Kennedy says, some men see things as they are and ask why. I dream things that never were and ask why not. So my question has always been, why not? You got to show me. I just can't take what you tell me to be factual. You've got to show me that it actually exists and that it can't be done. But even then, I'm going to try to find a way to do it.
You have to quantify it and be a critical thinker for yourself.
That's it. That's all. Education is about teaching us how to think, not what to think.
What are your main takeaways that you've had from being a teacher in a professional setting? I guess kind of about how to help students with real learning and knowledge that will go with them.
Well, one of the things I've done is that, I've been spending some time at school. I actually do public relations in the school now. And I've never really taught in the schools, but one of the things that I've been able to observe, and as you were saying, listening, watching how really schools have become almost like assembly lines now. And there's no critical thinking. Which I think is really sad, because I think we're really creating a generation of non-thinkers. And I'm hopeful that we can break that trend, because even when I was in school, with less than 1/3 of the resources or 1/4 of the resources that the students have now, we were able to succeed because we had a burning desire. But now it's almost like students are really taught to really just retain, and rather than create, it's just retain what I give you and move on. We're not teaching them to really take that retention that they got in there, molded and cultivated into something different, but just retain this piece and go get the next piece and add it and just keep going. So I think at some point we've got to get back to letting students use their minds and stop being such robots.
Ask why and why not.
X, Y, and why not? And not be, because in teachers in education and really and in theology, people are very reluctant to have that question asked to them, because many times they don't know the answer. So it's like, that means I got to go do some research to find out your answer, but I don't want to do that research. I just want you to take what I give you and move on. So, but we've got to allow them to ask their question why and why not.
Can you tell me a little bit about your education back in elementary school and even high school? Did they teach you Black history in the textbooks, or?
Not in the textbooks. In the textbooks, because when I started school in 1964, I was first grade in 1964. We, at that time, schools were segregated. And what happened was, you had one county system of schools, but you had segregated schools of facilities. So you'd have, technically we were part of the Marshall County school system, or the Holly Springs school system, but we were not part of the system that the white students were part of. So when they finished with books, they were sent down to us. So we basically learned what they wanted us to learn. So other than applied history from the teachers themselves, we did not get it. But the good thing about that time is that so much history was happening at that time that we were actually living during history. And so, and it was a keener interest in it and what was going on, because students could literally touch it. They could see it on TV, and you heard about what happened with Emmett Till, and you heard about what happened with King and Montgomery, and now all of a sudden it was real to us, because it was also marches up on the street, up at Russ College or at MI College, up on the square, and so it was like you didn't have to be forced to learn it; you were part of it.
How were the social movements back in the 70s, 80s? Were there big movements in Russ College or in the areas around here?
Well,
do you remember?
Yeah, Russ and MI both, Mississippi Industrial College. Mississippi Industrial College, I think, was founded in the I want to say the 50s, or maybe earlier than that. But Russ and MI were kind of, with the freedom schools and the freedom rides, they were like staging grounds. Students would come here at Russ College and at MI, and they would train them. And then they would go into various communities and do freedom schools. They had one here in Benton County. My brother Roy taught at one of the freedom schools. And they would go into other places where they didn't have educational systems that were really in tune. And so they taught them how to deal with situations on the ride, on the freedom ride, as well as, and as I say, they came here and then they were actually dispatched to other areas. So it was more staging and training ground.
Do you believe that protesting, as it was done in this generation that you're speaking of, is still effective in the same way in modern times?
I think it is. the thing that bothers me now, though, is that as King was saying, protest, but protest is only a part of
Right.
the movement. He understood that there needed to be agitation, there needed to be protest, but it's got to be a goal, it's got to be a plan, there has to be a focus. But now I see protesters marching, but have no idea what they're marching for. I mean, what do you want?
What are you marching towards?
What are you marching towards? What is the end game? And until we do that, and once again, it's because we have not been taught the critical thinking process to understand that you have elected officials, you have agitators that agitate for elected officials, but you still got to have legislation at the end of the day. You still got to have policy at the end of the day. It's like Dr. King said once that morality can't stop a man from lynching me, but that doesn't make man love me, but the law can make stop man from lynching me. But the law can't stop it from making me love, but it can stop me from hating, and lynching me. So we've got to have education and legislation, and we've got to have policy, and we can't fall in love with political entities. One of the things that I learned in political science was that in politics you have no permanent enemies, no permanent friends, just permanent interests. And when you start getting too aligned with permanent interests, permanent entities, then you can't do that. You can't be a friend. Sometimes even your enemy can be an ally. But if you always look at them as being an enemy, then you can never get anything done, because everybody has their own thoughts about things. And what you think may be counter with what I think, but if we can come to a meeting ground, let's start a negotiation, And unfortunately, I don't want to sound dated, but I think sometimes, too many times, the generations now don't understand the imperative of actually negotiating. They want all-out victory, and you don't always get all-out victory.
Right.
Very seldom that you get all-out victory. You win some battles, and hopefully at the end of the day you win the war, but you don't win the war in one day.
That is correct. That's what happens with the unions right now. That's what's going on. You get one union contract, and you know how long it takes years to get that one.
Just to get that one.
Right. I wanted to talk a little bit about your alderman days. What did you do? What were some initiatives that you took while you were in charge?
As an alderman, most of my I really kind of worked I was really the mayor pro tem at that time. So really I was more of a force on the board to help the mayor get his programs done. And then after I became mayor, it became obviously I could do more. But at the main time, I'm really pushing changes in personnel, making sure that we had a fair, equitable training program. Matter of fact, well, I'll segue into when I was mayor, we actually instituted a hiring concept instituted a process of hiring and promotional levels, so that people were not being promoted based on subjective, but we put all personnel into about 4 or 5 different levels, meaning how many you supervise, whatever, what type of training did you have within that. So that now people had some way of knowing, if I want to get to another level of employment and pay, I've got to move my skill sets up, as opposed to saying, well, I think you've been here 5 years, so I'm gonna give you a raise, or I think you've been here 10, so I'm gonna give you a promotion. But now it was performance based, which was very good, because people now didn't think everything was subjective, and we let them know that it was objective. We also did quite a bit with economic development in the city. Some of the most major economic development came while I was in the city, in terms of we probably did somewhere in the neighborhood of about $75 million worth of projects. Wow. With federal projects, and somewhere around 65 or 70 million in tax bonds and revenue bonds, general obligation bonds through the state, and these were all with no tax increase. We were able to help build a new school, new intermediate school. We had economic development portion that came in. I don't know which way you guys came in, coming out from 7 South. Which way did you guys come in?
That side. Yeah.
Y'all came in from?
By the highway.
We came from Glendale.
Glendale. Where's Glenville?
Oh, the area where Emmett Till was murdered.
Oh, so y'all came up through.
Yes,
So y'all might have come. Y'all might have come
Like
into
the Shell, there's a Shell, like in
These-
like the highway right there.
the Walmart.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So y'all came in on 7.
Okay.
Well, all that development in there with Wendy's and all that, that's development that we had done.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah. So we
wow.
did what we call a TIF program, it was a tax increment finance program, with a
Wow.
developer, guy who owns just Google Ops of land down there, and put in a new police station, new fire department, splash pad for the kids, a new park. So I mean, and all this was with no tax increase. So
That's really profound.
Yeah.
That's, so could you speak more to, I'm not sure if you recall the time where like the DMV and different places like that were taken into another town in a similar, that's close by, and then I think that their properties have like tripled in value since that has happened. Do you,
the DMV, part motor vehicle.
yes. I believe it was the DMV and some other prominent like
It
businesses.
used to be in this area, but
Yes.
they're not anymore.
that were
located.
moved to a nearby county.
Oh yeah. Okay. I know what you're saying. Yeah, that was one here, and I think they moved it to maybe New Albany.
Yes, I believe.
Yeah.
What was the purpose behind that? If you
Well, what they said was that they were downsizing, and I guess as Ronald Reagan said, devolution. Removing the central locations and bringing them back into. But because at one point you almost had one in every county seat, and they moved it, which obviously made some inconvenience for some people because you got to travel 15 or 20 miles to get a driver's license. That can be difficult. Some people didn't have that access, but also it cuts down on every time you remove that kind of governmental entity from a community, it takes out population that would be coming into that community. So it's going to hurt economically. They did the same thing, and with one of the they put a substation in from the county that would actually allow people to pay taxes on the north side of the county, pay property taxes, and a couple of other things they could do out of that particular office. Where they used to come into Holly Springs, which when they came in Holly Springs, they would now be shopping at supermarkets, shopping at the grocers, other stores, and spending money with retail. Now they're going into Collierville and other places across the state line, and in some cases across the county line, which is revenue that would have been coming to the city in terms of tax revenue, as well as real revenue. So it's hurt certain businesses.
right.
So it's had an adverse effect, So similar to what happened in the city of Jackson when they moved state government offices out of the city of Jackson. Jackson had a population when I was in school in Jackson State, probably around 235, 240,000 people. Now the population, I think the last count was down to probably less than 160,000 people.
Wow.
Because every time you move one of those government offices out, that means people don't come in.
Right.
Where they used to have to come down and do business with the state, or have that tax base coming from people setting up businesses, because downtown is now, before they tried to rebuild it, was going down because no businesses were there because no government agencies was there. That's the only reason people coming downtown was for the government. So when government was no longer downtown, people were not coming downtown. So businesses started closing up.
So if we could circle back to the programs you mentioned,
Okay.
where you were talking about like people not getting raises just because they've been there for 5 years and
Right.
it's performance based. You mentioned that you were trying to make sure that like the training programs and things like that were about equity. Could you
Right.
speak more in a civil rights or a general sense about the difference between equity and equality?
Well, I guess most people look at equity and equality. That's a good question. That's a very good quality. As a matter of fact, I saw a little piece on that. I can't remember how it goes. But, I've heard it said, people used to always say, my mother and father had 11 children. And people used to say, well, they treat them all the same. No, but you can't treat them all the same. You can treat them all fairly, but you can't treat them all the same because they are all not the same. And I think that's the whole thing with equity and equality. We all have equality, which gives us the right. We should have the right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. But at some point in time, you have to judge based on what a person has produced or not produced. And so that becomes becomes a question of whether you give everybody on the football team, on the baseball team, a trophy because they just participated. You know, you get participation trophies, but really, you know, was it really deserved? You know, maybe a certificate would have done that. But so you kind of, it's almost like you lessen the real worth of the trophy by giving everybody a trophy. The same thing with equity. Everybody can be treated with a sense of equality, as we all have a right to excel. But if you don't excel, there has to be some accommodations and some responsibility on your part to make sure that you do in fact excel. And I just can't promote. I can't promote everybody because they can't work every day.
I think that equity is kind of the intersectional version of equality.
Right.
It's understanding that giving everybody what you think is the same opportunity, like saying everybody in an area can go to the college and
Right.
stuff, but not understanding that some of those students will need a tutor or some of them will
That's
need a
it.
scholarship and
Right.
that kind of thing. Is
Good point. That's a good point.
Understanding we're not
Right.
all coming from the same point, even if we kind of are all allowed to run the race. Some of
Right.
us don't have shoes on, you know?
But we still can run the race.
Right.
Absolutely. Good point.
All right, so I wanted to move on a little bit to Holly Springs.
Okay.
What are some of the things about what makes special Holly Springs?
Well, you know, it's interesting. I used to always tell people when I was, even as mayor, you know, it was interesting how it was almost like I went full circle. Being born in a point in time when there was racial strife and a lot of disdain for the Civil War and the whole Confederacy and the whole antebellum, which is Holly Springs was known for as had probably one of the highest number of actual antebellum homes in the South, even including Atlanta at one point, especially those that predated the Civil War. And so what I did, one of the first things I did as mayor was obviously to do some tech. I went and got a grant to do a technology center. But the other piece that I did was to actually go before the legislature to get a designation of Hillcrest Cemetery as a national historical landmark. And some people thought I was crazy for doing that because the cemetery was known for the number of Confederate generals they have there. It was also known for the number of martyrs from the Yellow Fever, but also Hiram Revels is buried there, who was the first African-American senator in the United States. And so I saw a chance to look at Holly Springs had a history, and as a matter of fact, the house just across the street from here, they call it Walter Place, was where Grant actually staged his siege on Vicksburg. And this city was left because of a gentleman's agreement that when Van Dorn marched through here, they did not burn this city because Grant's wife was here at the house. Wow. So that's how the city was saved.
That's
Yeah, we didn't hear that.
You know, so what wound up happening is all these historic columns that you see here now would have been gone had it not been for that. But the other point was that Holly Springs was known for the Civil War, but it was also known for civil rights. And so I saw the opportunity to merge the two. Because, as you said, it was a transcending piece. It was an intersectional piece. Because both of those were monumental pieces in the history of not only the state, but this country. And I saw no other place in the country that I knew of, there may be some, that actually had as much to do with what happened in the Civil War as what happened in the civil rights movement, as in one spot. Atlanta may be close, maybe, because of King and because of the, Sherman coming through burning, maybe. But other than that, I saw no other place in the South that really could conjoin those two pieces. And so I began to play on the history of, because at some point you've got to play on the history of the antebellum. But I said, okay, fine. Let's play, while not doing that, then let's play on the significance of the history of the people who built these homes. Because that's your people. And so when I got people to understand this, like, okay, now we can embrace it. You can embrace it, but we can embrace it too. We don't embrace what happened in these homes, but we can embrace the fact that we built them. And we can also embrace the fact that during the civil rights movement, we were the centerpiece of movement, literally movement of the movement itself. And so it was kind of giving everybody a little something to buy into, and not making anybody feel like they couldn't be proud of their past. But at the same point, the whole thing with the stars and the bars and stripes. Now we wasn't going with that. You know, that wasn't a part of no history. That was not part of the Civil War. Don't bring me that flag. That was not a part of your history because you didn't start flying that flag till after the Civil War was over. So we don't want to hear about that one. You know, these monuments, you didn't build these monuments until the 1900s. You know, long after the Civil War. So but it's okay if you want to talk about your, you know, the big hoop skirt dresses. That's fine. Ain't no problem with that. You know, but we're not going to talk about the other piece.
How do you feel the community feels about that? The antebellum house is still out there, and you know, in some of those cases, there's reenactments
Right.
and so forth. How do you think the community feels about that? 'Cause
Well,
some of them are trying to forget the history.
One of the things we tried to do in Holly Springs was to really come in and to have real enactments of all pieces.
Okay.
The slaves, the slave quarters, all of the pieces. As a matter of fact, there are about 2 or 3 homes here they call it outside, behind the big house. It's a program where they actually would take kids through, because a couple of them still have slave quarters up. And they would actually take kids into these facilities and show them what they did in those slave quarters, how they prepared meals for the big house, and how they were the central part, and explaining to them the true essence of what they did and the importance of what they played toward the big part. But at the same part, for instance, Jim Wells' dad, Jim Wells, built one of the big houses over there, which is actually where the museum is now. She wasn't born in the house, but he built the house. So one of the things we did was to go and get funds to purchase it, and to actually get it become a federal project now, so we can continue to get funding for it. But just to show people that history, you can't change history. It's there. You learn from it. There's some proud moments, and then there's some moments when you don't feel proud about what happened. But at the same point, it's there. So you learn. You can't run from it. But because Santiago reminds those who don't ignore the past are doomed to repeat it. So we've got to learn history, otherwise we'll repeat it. And so that's why I tell people, you can't run from it. Embrace it. And you can't blot it out. Take the good and move on.
That's correct. What other projects are going on in Holly Springs? We recently heard about the name of one of the streets, Memphis, switching to Ida B. Wells. Can you tell us how do you feel about that? And do you foresee other streets in those areas changing, main intersections?
Well,
what's your input?
I've never been a big fan of street naming because I think it lets the community off when you just come in and say, okay, I'll give you a name of the street and that's it. Because technically, more often than not, it's going to be a street that not many people travel on anyway. Memphis Street is a little bit different. But one of the things that happens when you change names of streets, you dislocate people. I mean, you interrupt people's lives. You got change of addresses, change of everything that you own, everything that you've ever bought. All of your business and personal contacts have to be rearranged because you got new addresses, post office, everything. So it seems like easy to do, but if you're talking about an area that's probably a mile or 2 or 3 miles long, that's a lot of people on that area. It's a lot of official papers that have to be changed, Social Security, whatever. It's just all kinds of stuff. So my thing is, I would have been much more in tune with doing something. You have a museum. There was a park that's actually behind the museum. My preference was to rename the park, because then you could segue from the museum and have interactive activities related to the museum there in the park. But now,
That's a good idea.
You can't have interactive on the streets.
What's the park name?
The park now is just Spring Hollow,
Okay.
and that's one of the projects that we did, and it's actually just outside of the door, literally, of the museum. And it's a nice area because I had really planned to do an amphitheater there, and it was actually perfect for that setting. And it's kind of in a valley, like because and not only that, but it's the original founding spot of the city of Holly Springs, which was actually named by the Cherokee because at that time Holly Springs was known for springs, open water springs, cool water springs, and holly berries. And so thus the name Holly Springs. And so it was a kind of a trading post for Native Americans. And so it would have been a great thing for everybody, just at that spot, you know. So, and we could have even played off of that as well, because Ida B. Wells obviously was always in fighting for the rights of those who had been disenfranchised, and certainly Native Americans have definitely been disenfranchised, and still are.
So I believe that the street that her museum is on is named after a Confederate soldier.
Randolph.
Right. And so do you not feel like, in now that you've explained part of the reason why, like kind of making it an inconvenience for the citizens and stuff with addressing, that makes a lot of sense. But do you feel that there's no power in leaving like a Confederate name on a street?
Well, one of the things that had come to pass is this guy was actually one of the founders. Randolph was actually one of the founders. So you have to be very careful when you try to reconstruct, when you reposition history, because that's a significant piece as well. A founder is a significant piece. Whether you agree with his politics or not, he's a founder. So and when you start doing that, you start really pulling out some of the linchpins of your history, you know, stability of your history. And that's why I was saying basically, the street itself would have been okay, but I just didn't see. Sometimes I'm just a firm believer that, you know, the area of least resistance, because at some point you got to start bringing people together. So if you're always fighting on this, go into some situations sometime where everybody wins, you know, and then you can come back later on down the road, and now we've built some, you know, some IOUs. You know, we built a relationship. So now when I come back for something that's very difficult, you make, okay, he gave us a little bit on this end. We'll go with him on this. But if you're always knocking them down on this end, on something very minimum, and when some of the massive stuff come up, you're not going to have that. You're not going to have that juice.
Are you related to the artist Dale DeBerry?
Dale.
Okay, because yesterday, it's really funny, like we were talking about like what things in the blood and like roots, and how sometimes like you unintentionally do things similar to your ancestors, and you were saying in the beginning of the interview about like politics and stuff kind of being in the blood. And he said a very similar thing yesterday in his own way to what you just said. He was saying that people say not to sugarcoat things and kind of like, you know, apply pressure and whatever. And he was like, sometimes I'm going to put some molasses on this medicine because you need to eat it or you're going to die.
That's it.
And I think that that's a really, really good point of what's going on lately in politics and stuff, is people aren't understanding. It's like if you win, you know, 50% and I win 50%, we both lost 50%. So we can both kind of walk away like, okay, and there will be some things that they can give you 65, 75% on and things like that. But there might also be things that you can give them 65 or 75% on, because it's not the most. Pick your battles.
Pick your battles. That's
Pick
it.
your battles
That's
is really, really important, because
that is
everything, you're not going to get everything,
That's
but
it.
we're going to get nothing if we always
If
feel
we
like
always
we have
have
to
to win.
everything.
That's it.
Right?
That's it.
Okay, now going back a little bit, I want to go back to maybe your teens or 60s, 70s, 80s. Did you suffer or did you go through any experiences where racism was, you know, that defined you a little bit, you know, the way that people interacted with you? Can you tell us?
Yes.
Thank you.
Literally, the street that I lived on was Boundary, which is, matter of fact, northwest of here. And the school was on Valley, which was probably maybe a good block from where I lived. Every day after walking home from school, we literally will run off the streets by Caucasian guys coming by throwing bottles and throwing bricks, and we had to take cover, because at that time it was kind of like almost like the borders of the city. Then most of the area was wooded, and so we were kind of like on the edge of the city limits. And then another particular instance that really kind of shaped it was probably when I was around maybe 11, and we used to go to the same school I'm talking about now, which was Holly Springs High School at that time, but we called it Sims. And we were playing basketball. You know, we would go in on Saturday mornings and go in, one then shoot basketball, come back out, close the doors. We left the window. Coaches knew it. They would leave the window. We just come in, so we had open doors for us. But on this particular day, somebody, I don't know, somebody called the police. I don't know who it was. I don't know, he called it what. But anyway, so we noticed, we looked outside, and there was just police everywhere. All we were doing there just inside shooting basketball. We're not doing anything. We did it every Saturday morning. We go shoot ball, come out, sweep the floor, and go home. But anyway, so naturally, police would not good friends with us. We were not friends at that time. We're young black boys, and we scattered. And as I ran down in one of the subfloors in the what they call the shop, the wood shop, there was this police officer that had a real reputation of being a pure racist. And he pulled his pistol on me. I guess I was about from here to that railing, and he said, "Run." He said, "I don't miss a rabbit, let alone a little black nigga." And I think to myself now, with all the things that have happened with the Floyd and Trayvon's and Ahmaud, all these things that have happened, what could have happened to me? Because it was just me and him there. And he could have very well shot me and killed me and said, well, he attacked me, as they oft-time do. And I see it as God kind of keeping me, protecting me, and for the fight that I had to come along. Because at that point, I realized then that we got to change this. I had been saying it, I had been thinking to myself, but not saying it. But then I began to say it. That's when I really came out of my shell and said, no. Matter of fact, I led a march not soon after that where I boycotted Sonics, because of some economic issues. But I became very vocal and involved and determined to change the situation. Okay.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about, were you involved with organizations during your school years? How much involvement did you do politically, whether it was protesting or?
More so in college. More protests in college. NAACP, we protested quite a bit in school. Matter of fact, we were responsible for marching to get to get students the right to be able to vote, register and vote at their location rather than their home. So we would march to Mississippi to do that as well. As I say, during the time that I was in primary school, we were actually doing protest marching and school walkouts. So it was always been there. Yeah.
Okay. Another question regarding Holly Springs. How do you feel like it differentiates from the southern Mississippi regions? I suppose because, we're always listening about the big places in South Mississippi, West Mississippi, but Northern Mississippi sort of I don't want to say gets left behind, but, it's a little bit more obscure on that end. So
I've always said that Marshall County, Holly Springs and Marshall County were very unique in that it was probably a microcosm of most of the state. I've always said that you could look at Marshall County and just kind of look at all segments of the state. You had the hill country, which is the far east country, which is part of Marshall County, which is the east of Holly Springs. You have the Delta, which is in western Mississippi, which in Marshall County would be northern Holly Springs, rich farmlands. And then you had kind of a cross-section of people at the same time. You had the southern whites, but then you had those who had come in because you had a little influence from Ole Miss, and so you had a little higher educated white population than you do in some of the counties, who were not quite as bought into their racial thinking of superiority. And at the same time, you had before my close, you had two high institutions of learning here, which is very unusual in any place in the country to have two, and especially two predominantly black, historical black colleges in one place, and for them to be literally across the street from each other. Other than Atlanta, you didn't have that kind of close connection, but so that was probably the only place that other than Holly Springs, that had more historical black colleges. So it was a learned population coming in. So you had influx of people coming from all over the country who could bring in new ideas and new ways of doing things and new thought processes, which kind of, I think, lifted the level of people consciousness and conscience here, and also gave them a little bit more courage to do some things, because they said, well, okay, man, I'm coming from Chicago, New York, whatever, well, we've done this, so okay, we can do this. So it gave them an extra added push.
Okay. For demographics speaking, how do you foresee the future of Holly Springs? What do you think could be done to, bring in people to make it flourish even more? I know the tourism industry, that's something that they're trying to propel, or there are other things that they could do in order for the community to move forward.
Right. I think Holly Springs, the first thing it has to do, and I think we haven't gotten to that point yet, is to recognize some of its transgressions. For instance, in the educational system, you still have people that are trying to hold on to these segregated academies, even though they are now bringing in black students to get monies. You cannot afford to have three school systems in a community this big. You got the Catholic school system, you've got the public school system, and then you got the academy school system. You can't afford to have three school systems in a community this small. Your resources are too splintered. Your cohesiveness is broken when you have 1/3 of the population going to school over here and 1/3 of the population going to school, because schools are what bring people together, for basketball games and for little cookouts and all kinds of recitals. That's what keeps a community together. Coming out watching little Johnny and little Mia and all of us up there in their little tutus, or they're playing, and we think that's the best thing since sliced bread. But that's what keeps a community. And when those schools are not joined, your community is not going to be joined, because your resources the resources that you need to prepare your city is too splintered. And so what winds up happening is a select few, but the majority will not. And so people will see that, and business see that, because nobody wants to invest money when a community itself is not, when it doesn't even give the appearance of unity or togetherness. And so I think that's a big thing. But the other thing is, I think we've got to start daring to dream. I don't think the leadership we have now in the city or the county have enough vision. I think they're, and I'm not just saying this because I came out of office, because I really think, and people have been begging me to come back, and I'm like, no, there comes a time when you move on.
What made you feel like that? We'll get to. I really want to know, how come you didn't continue? What, I'm going to keep going.
Well, in 2013, I had a group of people tell me, well, Andre, man, you've done a great job, but we just think it's time for a change. I said, fine. So, and some of it was hurt, but I didn't get out of government altogether, so I came back again, and same thing happened. So I said, no. So then I ran for the Senate, state Senate, because I think it's time, as I was trying to tell them, even now, you have to move to a different level. And politics is local, but money is regional. A city can't survive with just its own economic structure and its own financial, physical, or physical with P structure. And so, as I was telling them, until you change the way the wheel is being greased in Jackson, you're not going to change what's happening in your city. Because I was able to do the things that I did because I had relationships in Jackson, because I had clerked in the legislature. So many of these guys that were now, when I was clerking in 79, these guys were now chairmen of committees, powerful committees, Ways and Means Committees, the Finance Committee, Appropriations Committee. So I could go to those guys and get government bonds done. Matter of fact, we were one of only 5 cities that were historically getting government bonds. I'm talking Jackson and Tupelo, and I was in there with the big boys, but no small towns were getting in it because we had vision about what we were doing, and not just saying, well, give me $100,000, give me $500,000, but we had a plan for what we were doing, and we could show the impact that it was going to have in the community, the total community, and the long range effect that it would have in terms of improving economic opportunities, quality of life, educational, all of those components, and so. But that was vision. We were talking about technology. I was talking about it back in 2000. We were talking about trying to get an internet system set up that the city actually owned. But I had a board that didn't have that vision. South Haven, just down the street, took up my project about 6 years ago. Bam! Now they own the internet system for the whole city of South Haven, which is the second largest city in the state now. Wow. But they didn't have any vision. So as the scripture said, where there's no vision, the people perish. You've got to have vision.
What do you think why is there a lack of vision? Do you feel like the people are still in the same positions for very long?
I think it has a lot to do with one, what period of time we come through. As you say, I came through a period of time when we were taught to creatively think, to dream big. If mind can conceive it, your heart can believe it, you can achieve it. But now people just see, they look at, well, I'm gonna see if it works over there, and then I'll do it. They don't have that risk taking. No risk, no gain. And when you're behind, you can't win a race by keeping up. You got to run faster. I mean, if he's running 25 steps, I can't run 25 steps and he's 50 steps ahead of me. I'm gonna still lose. I got to find some way to increase some steps.
Take a risk.
Take some risk. And so when a community is small like this, it's not like you're on the radar where they're going to automatically give you what you need to succeed. You've got to go in there and fight and claw and come up with innovative ideas and merging projects and finding collaborative partners and all this stuff, doing regional concept partnerships, which we did in a lot of cases with the utility department. And we may work with a 2 or 3 county consortium, because that's what it's all about now. Nobody wants to. You got 82 counties in Mississippi, so you think they're gonna try to fund all 82 counties? No.
Definitely not. Right.
You got somebody gonna get left out.
Right. So at that point, it's like Holly Springs needs to look out for itself.
Closed mouth will not get fed.
Right.
Closed mouth will not get fed. And then if you're fighting, it's like you were saying, if you're fighting. If the board is fighting with you and the mayor's fighting with the board,
nothing gets resolved. It's kind of like politics.
And that's it. Politics, I tell people all the time, politics is the art of compromise. It's the art of compromise. It's negotiation. Yes. Nobody wins. Nobody gets everything they want. Right. Just go in and get something. And you notice now, even with the Democratic Party now, everybody's beating Biden across the head. Look, man, you got a 50-50 Senate. And really, you can't depend on all 50 of those. So when you can win that battle and go it on. You're not going to, well, we got the Senate, we got the House. Yeah, you got the Senate House, but you still got to have 65 votes to get anything done, and 60 votes to get anything done in the Senate.
That's right.
Shoot.
So I guess I would like to ask if you. So you said that when you first left office, people were kind of saying like, oh, maybe it's time for like some new blood, some new ideas, like a new fluctuation. Right. Do you feel now that there's been like a chunk of time that you would consider returning?
Well, not to the mayor's office, and I say that not because I think it's time to get people to understand, and I think that's what happened in this country when you start looking at government as being only local. Now, Tip O'Neill says all politics is local, which it is, but not all government is local. And people tend to think that government is local, and that's all they know about. They don't understand the state Senate, the state house, the governor's races, Congress, Senate. This country has changed because not enough people paid enough attention to regional and state governments. And so now you have all these legislatures across the country that are instituting all these crazy laws, and governors are signing them in, and you can't override them because the governors they don't have the veto power, because the governor's not going to veto them anyway. Even when you have Democratic governors, in some cases, they can't even get stuff done. They can't, even if he vetoes it, they can still override it. And so this whole push to return back, or movement forward to go back, is really crippling, because we took our eyes off the ball of realizing that it's not all about just the mayor and the city council. It's the governor, it's the state legislature, and it's not all about just the president. But the president is important, because guess what the president does? He appoints Supreme Court justices, who work for the rest of their lives. And all of the major changes in this country have come from some decision made by the Supreme Court. Whether it's Brown versus Board of Education, whether it's Plessy versus Ferguson, whether it's now Roe versus Wade, which has been redone, you name it. And if you don't have people there who are cognizant of the fact that, who would have ever thought that we would live to see a time when the Supreme Court, which has traditionally given rights would now have a Supreme Court who takes away rights. That's never been done in the history of this country.
What push do you think, and maybe support, do you feel is needed in order to cause more young people of color to be running for office?
I think that a sense of ownership.
That's really good.
Because I really don't think many young people now have a sense of ownership of where they are. Not their school, not their communities. It's kind of like, and I'm not saying they haven't had some reason to feel some of that.
Right.
Because I think in many cases, people, and I had the same issues when I was coming up. You know, I was never grown with some people politically. You know, I'm like, okay, I've been in this thing for 30 years. When do I get grown? You know, when am I no longer just a young boy? But my thinking has always been, that's why I keep telling them it's so important that I reach back and help pull up some, because I'm not the only one who can do this. Yeah, you may think you did it pretty good, but I'm not the only one who can do it. You know, and I want them to understand that there has to be like some kings, there had to be some Andy Youngs, and with Moses, you know, there had to be some Aarons, and, you know, and there's some Joshuas, you know, you got to come, because otherwise, if you depend on just the leadership you have now, it doesn't transition, it ends. And so I just want them to start taking ownership for their own and not being so transit. Because right now, most of them are real transit. You know, it's from city to city, from town to town. I want them to just kind of put some roots down and say, okay, man, this is my dirt. You know, I tell my son all the time, you know, and my grandchildren, you know, this is your dirt. No matter where you go, your dirt will always be here. And every now and then you need to come back to that dirt and just touch it and feel where your ancestors were. And I think if they do that, they'll be okay.
So mentorship and a sense of home. And I think that what you said was also really important. And you mentioned Moses and Aaron. I think that there's something in the Bible about how like a hometown prophet can't be taken seriously. Like
a prophet not without honor is hanging in his home country, save his own home in his own country.
Right, but I feel it's really prophetic that you mentioned that it doesn't have to stay that way. Because I do think that there's something to be said, like how you said you had ties in Jacksonville, and that's how you were able to bring those things back home. I do think that for a lot of community outreach and community organizing, and especially in a place like Holly Springs, because of the way that the resources have been taken away for so long, it's actually really important for like the youth to go get their education, maybe at a bigger place. And like you had worked at the clerk's office and different things like that, you kind of bring some roots that end up being like the streams that lead back to bringing the resources back to your community. But the important part is that you do bring them back to your community.
You bring them back.
Have all those skills,
Yeah.
What about if you never return?
And they have to understand that you plant seeds in your 20s.
Yes.
That you won't see fruit from till your 40s in some cases.
Good fruit takes time.
And they have to understand that, you know, the fruit is not going to, the tree is not going to bear fruit the first year it grows up. And so they have to understand. That's what I tell them all the time. This is, I mean, when I clerked at the legislature, I mean, I'm in my 20s. When I became mayor, I'm 40. Okay?
Oh,
So, you know, so lo and behold, the connection. And so sometimes it's because they live in such a microwave.
Yes. Instagram.
Everything is bam, bam, you know, and with Facebook and Twitter, you know, I mean, and that's fine, you know, because I use it myself. But, you know, there are times when you have to understand everything is not instant.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes you need to stop and just maybe go read a real book, or read a real magazine, you know, or, you know, because everything you get instantly is not always good for you, nor is it always true.
Right. So you said that you were in your 20s when you were in the clerk's office, and then you didn't become mayor until you were in your 40s. What kind of community outreach and things were you doing in between that time?
Well, you know, being involved in Boy Scouts, I worked with Cub Scouts. We worked in a program called Saving Our Sons, Saving Our Boys. Obviously, with the church, I was also into motivational speaking and speaking to youth groups, and just talking about. As I used to tell my son, I used to talk about history and not his story. I told him, even though they both spell the same, there's a difference. And they used to always say, what do you mean by his story? I said, his story is what you read in the book. History is what you have to go outside the book and tell, because they're not going to put the true history in the book. It's not there, because that's what they don't want it there. And I said, even beyond that, you got to go beyond the curtains.
Yes.
So what was the
Yes.
relevance of this? And so, that's when you learn about the Fannie Lou Hamers and, the other people. Yeah, you hear about King, but you got to hear about Mega or some people. You got to hear about, you got to hear about all these guys, that were not big textbook folks.
Yes.
But they were behind the scene, these are the people that you need to understand. These were people that were no names.
Right.
That got beat up,
Right.
And killed. And
Because there's his side, your side, and then the truth.
and then the truth.
And in often ways to find the truth, you need to, the best way is to compare both sides.
compare both
to get a
sides.
full picture.
Get a full picture.
Right.
So, but anyway, just kind of being in tuned and just staying involved and, working with the school system, doing a lot of volunteering with school, working with kids, sports program, little league programs, baseball, basketball, that way, just kind of staying involved.
Could you speak more to your parents' childhood or maybe your grandparents' childhood growing up and what it was like for them, maybe culturally, if you remember any stories that stood out?
Well, interesting. My great-great-grandmother, I do remember my dad actually met her. She was actually a slave.
Oh my goodness.
And because my dad was born in 1915, so her name was Delilah Horner. And it was actually my grandmother's mother. And he remembered telling the stories of what, the work process that they had to go through and what it was like when they, at the end of the day, and, just recounting stories to them about slavery. And then obviously, with my parents being born in, I guess, the turn of the century, we know how difficult times were in this country. And obviously you can even just magnify that for people of color. They were sharecroppers. My grandparents were sharecroppers. And my dad grew up on the sharecroppers farm. My mom's people, actually from Oxford, they owned their land. They owned probably maybe a couple hundred acres of land.
Wow.
So they were a little bit different from my grandparents on my mom's side. They, most of them came in from South Carolina. But most of my dad's people came in from North Carolina. As a matter of fact, I've been able to trace my great-great-grandfather back to Frank, which is back to 1831. He was actually owned by a DeBerry, I think it's Edwin DeBerry, who was a congressman. So I'm thinking, well, okay, maybe some politics has been close to my family all along. But yeah, he was a congressman, and actually, the way we actually got to Holly Springs is when he died, he left slaves to his daughter, and his daughter was going to be moving to Mississippi, and so one of the slaves that he willed to her was my great great grandfather Frank, and my great grandmother Mariah, and they came with her to Holly Springs. That's how we actually got to Holly Springs. Yeah, so
I'm amazed that you were able to find that out.
It took a lot of digging on, and Ancestry.com was really good, and just digging. But the sad part about it, and that's the frustrating part about it, now once I get back to 1831, I got to get into the Book of Slaves, and it's a whole different ball game there. And I tell people, but I at least want my kids to know and my grandkids to know their lineage, and I don't want them to think that they. Matter of fact, I told my grandson once, my first grandson, that he actually had the opportunity to meet 4 great-great-grandmothers.
Wow.
And I told him, I said, that was special, even though my mom died before he really got to know much about her, but he did meet her as a young kid, so he can't say he's met her. But now he still has 3. And I said, to have that kind of wisdom, because I never saw one of my great-great-grandparents, and you saw all 4 of them. Grandmothers, you didn't see the great fathers, but you saw 4 great-great-grandmothers. And I said, that's rare, very rare. So I told him, I said, but I want them to understand the importance of knowing that you didn't just start at your birthday.
Yes.
That your history goes back, and your ancestors, whatever ethnic group we are, it's the ancestors that we're responsible for us being here, and we owe it to them to tell their history.
That reminds me of the quote, I am my ancestors' wildest dreams.
Right. That's it.
So you mentioned your grandchildren and your children. Were there things that your father told you, like warning you about ways to handle police, or maybe like Caucasians and different things like that, that you see kind of like a modern version that you had to prepare your sons for?
Well, I'll tell you, not necessarily my father, but from a scene from Roots, whenever a child was born. I was not done that, but once I saw that movie, it was such it was just seared in my mind that was a point. So when both my children were born, as soon as they came home from the hospital, first thing I did was go outside, literally, and told them, behold, the only thing greater than yourself. And so that's where I brought them up, that there's no one, as my dad just said, you're not better than anybody. It's just in some cases better off. And nobody's better than you. Okay? And you are there's only one person in the world that you have to feel that you have to be beholding to, and that's the Creator, and nobody else. Because we are all just insignificant creatures down here.
That's right. And we're limited on time.
And we're limited on time.
That's for sure. I wanted to ask you a question. Going back, I think, to your great-grandmother on your mother's side, I think you mentioned she was from North Carolina and had over 100 acres or something like that?
Right. No, she was from South Carolina.
South Carolina.
Right.
Okay. Regarding that, how did she get those acres, or how did she work her way, to get all 100 acres? I mean,
I want to believe. I want to believe when I looked at the skin tone of my parents on that side, that it was probably a case where one of them was probably a child of the master.
Okay.
Because the family was very, very light.
Okay, well, fair enough.
Yeah. So I would surmise that probably that was some of that going on. But then I think some of them probably just had some ambition as well. Okay. Yeah, had some ambition.
Okay, so I'm actually really glad that you brought that up, because I would love to hear some of your thoughts on colorism in this area. This morning, someone at the hotel who was like a darker complexion, as I was leaving, he said he knew we were coming out to do field work, and he said, be careful staying out there in the sun so that you don't get too dark. And he was like a dark chocolate man. So right. I just looked at him for a very long time and basically said, black is beautiful, and walked away. Right. And I realized, because I'm from the West, and it's I'm from Las Vegas, a bigger city and stuff, so I don't see that much stuff happen anymore. And if it does happen, it's usually older people, or usually someone in my family, or someone making a joke. Mm-hmm. Do you have any thoughts on if you've seen that kind of thing kind of erode over time, to where as generations are passing down, that colorism is kind of fading away, if that makes sense, or is that still common for the area?
That's a very interesting question. I think in some large parts there's still a strong socialization process that is there. And it's embedded. It's embedded, and in some it's embedded to the point they don't even realize it.
Right.
We still have a lot of people that don't appreciate their worth and the worth of their people, and they see the gains of other races as being more significant than what they have done, not recognizing that what they've come through. Interesting point. I was telling the church. I think it was Donna Brazil who's saying, and she brought this to attention. They were talking about the celebration of the Americas. That this is the first time that America has been free, has been a country as long as we were out of slavery. In other words, the country is 251 years old, and we've been out of slavery 251 years. Okay? which was interesting to let you know how long we were in slavery. You know, we were in slavery. We were in slavery for 400 years. The country was only 52 years old. I think 6. I'm sorry, 256 years old. The country was only 256 years old, but we were slaves. We were slaves for 400 years. So we have been out of slavery at the same amount of years now that the country is old.
I would like to actually talk about, so Dale DeBerry yesterday, he showed us one of his pieces that was
The mask.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the chains, how they were loose because he was saying now they can loosen the reins and kind of give more space because what they instilled is like a dog that will stay in the yard basically, and you don't need to have a shock
Because
fence or whatever, right?
He's been trained. Yeah.
Right. So I feel as though that's also part of the reason why some of us are keeping each other and ourselves down, like that colorism that man learned.
And that's that socialization process.
Right.
That's that Willie Lynch syndrome, which, I mean, you're familiar with Lynch. Willie Lynch basically was he was a slaver. He was actually a slave consultant on how to keep slaves in line. And Willie Lynch told him, said, what you do is you keep the light skin separated from the dark skin, the fair half separated from the coarse hair, and every now and then you actually execute one to instill fear, and you can control them for years to come. And so you have that jealousy piece that comes in because those that are working in the house have better standards than the ones that are working in the field, so they feel that they're different. Right. And the ones who are skin colors are different. Mine, because I'm a fair skin color and you're of darker skin color, you have more privileges than I do, or I have less privileges than you do. And so all that constant stuff going on, and it's still there. And at the end of the day, we're all just one, But if you can keep people separated, which America has been very good at doing.
Yeah, now they're doing it to the masses.
And now they're doing it to the masses. They're still doing it to the masses. Now they have all of us fighting against each other. And that's what King talked about when King was doing the movement. King was saying, look, poor whites, you have as much to gain as we do. You have lost as much as we have. You have less than what we have. Even though you have the skin color, you don't have the rights. You don't have the economics. You don't have the privileges that they have. You Hispanics, you are suffering. We're all suffering. Let's come together as a group. That's why Chavez and King and all those guys can say, hey, we have a common goal, we have a common enemy.
Enemy of my enemy is my
That's
friend.
it, my enemy is my friend.
It's just similar, I feel like, to being in either solitary confinement or in being like in a high security versus a maximum security prison, like just different things where it's like we're all in prison though.
That's right.
Nobody, you're like, just because your crime is different than we're all like enslaved in this situation. And so it's odd that like even if you do the work to kind of grow out of the mentality of I'm better than because I look a certain way and stuff. When I grew up, I didn't even realize that race was a thing until like a blonde girl told me I couldn't go to her birthday party because I was black. And it's stuff like that that's like, even if you don't have that in you and you don't see yourself that way, I like worked so hard. Not anymore really, because it's not really in me, but I had to work to not see, but the fact that somebody who wasn't benefiting from that privilege, the person who was like, I would have benefited from feeling that way, was like, no, but this is how things go. So make sure that you're doing the thing that keeps you superior to me is just very interesting. That it's like, that chain thing is very,
well, it's
powerful
it's like Isabella, have you read The Cast?
I'm sorry?
The Cast.
No.
And it,
By, who's that by?
what's Isabella, just Google Cast, The Cast. I can't call her name right now, which talks about, it's almost like the caste system in India, and how she's really saying we basically have a caste system in this country. Yeah. And America's always had a caste system.
Yep.
And probably stronger than the one that was in India.
It's true.
Because when it comes to Latino, Hispanics, Native Americans,
Goes back to the colonization.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was all. They exploited all of us. So white Caucasian men.
You brought really great points today.
Thank you.
I would like to maybe, we're over an hour at this point, but
Wow.
Yeah, so I mean, I know time goes by fast, and the conversation definitely is very stimulating, and you brought really, really good points about everything, your perspective too.
Thank you, thank you.
Yesterday we had a total different view, but like you mentioned, even today, you have to get all
Gotta get 'em
points,
all.
all
Gotta get 'em
inputs,
all.
and then make your own critical
Right.
thought on the way that you're on whatever you believe.
Right.
And analyze it. But with that said, where do you see Holly Springs in the next 5 years? Where do you see it after, you went through office, now you're
Right.
gone, you've seen how it's been playing out.
Well, and unless there's some monumental changes in the thought processes, and I think there's been some collective efforts to talk about to really kind of have some interventions, some governmental and political and policy interventions in the city, because it needs to happen. Otherwise, if it doesn't, I don't see the next 5 years being that bright.
Okay.
I see it as being. I'm usually not a pessimist. I'm a very optimist, but I can't. I'm a realist.
Okay.
If I'm nothing else, and you can't just say things going to change. Things not going to change because I just keep saying they're going to change. I've got to do something to make them change. And so right now I'm hearing people say, "Well, we're going to change. We're going to change." But yeah, that's what I hear you saying. But I don't see you doing it, and I don't see you putting steps in place to affect this change that you're talking about. And so I'm really concerned about the leadership right now, and that's not an insult, but I'm really concerned that the leadership is not putting enough homework into what they're doing, because as a student of politics, this is serious stuff. This is serious to me, because you impacted people's lives for years and generations to come. I remember I had one of my board members, one of the earlier boards that I worked with when I was mayor, made the comment one night. We were making a decision. She said, "Well, if we don't get it right, we get it right the next time." And I'm saying, no. You don't get another time when you make a policy. When you make a policy, that policy is enacted, and some people's lives are impacted. And you don't get a redo on people's lives, or the services that help to improve the quality of life of people. Or even if you're dismissing somebody who didn't need to be dismissed, you're disrupting that person's life. I used to tell them all the time, it's more disruptive to the biggest decision that you make is to fire, not to hire. Because when you come in there, you didn't have anything in the first place, so nothing has been planned. But when you come in here for a determination, you planned out a budget, you bought stuff, you planned the kids' Christmas stuff, you planned the kids' school stuff, and now all of a sudden your check ain't gonna be coming in. So that's serious to me. So when you do that, everything you do, you think about what it's like when I'm in that chair. And that's what I try to do.
Okay. Any last comments that you would like to leave to the Holly Springs next generation or community?
Well, it would be just to never forget where we come from. Never forget the history and the past. Not that you live in it, but that you must understand that it's important, so that as you transgress and as you transfer to the next generation, because each generation has to leave a piece that has to be picked up and carried into the next generation.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. This has been a pleasure being here today and having the honor to interview you today. Thank you for making time and being here today.
Enjoyed you. Great job.
Okay.
You gotta go around. The Bear Bryant Museum is like a church.
Okay.
You walk in, I've never seen a museum.
I've been to the whole thing.
Yeah, but this he's got his own everything in there, just like you do. What do you mean? You go in, you quiet.